hear me?
Yeah. Look at this. It's
That
hilarious. Where'd you get that? That's funny. Did you have that had to have that made?
I think I got it from China.
Yeah, yeah. We
Oh,
don't.
Lauren that works for us made it.
Oh, that's so funny. I when you stepped up, I saw my logo. I go, oh my God. So here's the funny thing. I have some yellow glasses like that. My wife says, don't wear those yellow glasses.
That way you focus on my eyes, you know.
Yeah, we would have both had yellow glasses. I've got Bill Rey on the line here. We're going to be doing my podcast on the Art Dealer Diaries at Claggett Ray Gallery. How about that?
Pretty cool.
It is pretty cool. I love the background, man. You got everything in there. So what is that in the who is the painter behind you with the cow? But this is for those of you who listen to this only, you need to do the podcasts on YouTube because you can see the beautiful background. Because I can see like a little sharp, it looks like on the
Yep.
bottom
A
left.
little his model Arturo,
Yep.
little W.R. Lee,
Uh,
Jim Reynolds is the big painting.
who is the one?
Jim Reynolds.
Oh, I wondered. Oh my God.
Yeah,
God, that guy is so talented.
he was a great one.
He is amazing. So what's new? What's cooking? What's in your life, Bill?
It's
You've
just
moved. Let's talk about that. Let's just do that right off the bat because I
you
want
know,
people to know you're not where you
I'm
were for
gonna
30 years. You've moved to a new locate, not far away, right?
no, but it's interesting because I moved to Vail to work in the art business in 1983, so 38 years ago, and I've worked in Vail Village for almost 37 years. We moved a year and a half ago down to Edwards. It was kind of a pre-COVID decision. We were looking at spaces to lease or buy in Edwards, just to kind of move forward and modernize. I mean, the space we were in was owned by our partner Sally, who we bought out of the business after Ray died in 2015. So a couple of years after that, we bought out Sally because she didn't need to worry about the art business and have the freedom to travel and whatnot. So we started thinking about the next 20 years and what things look like. And so we started looking down in Edwards. And so now we have a space with high ceilings and it's just exciting. It's just, it's so much different than the village. And Vail Village is wonderful, but it's changing, you know, everywhere. The retail world is changing, you know, and in Vail, it's a lot of high-end retail chain stores are moving in, like the same has happened in Aspen, same is happening in Jackson Hole. And so the galleries are dwindling. There's maybe 5 galleries left in Vail Village anymore. There used to be 14.
Hmm.
And so we just looked at the future. We have the art center down here, which is kind of a hands-on art center. The bookworm is down here. We live in Lake Creek, which is a great ranching valley about a mile from the gallery, so we're close. And it just was a good fit. It was funny because we really started looking hard in early January of 2020. And by late February, you know, things looked like the pandemic might be serious. And so we had found a space, we started negotiating. We worked out a deal middle of March after we closed the gallery in Vail. We have a very good doctor friend who encouraged us and exposed us to what was coming, what they thought was coming, and what they were concerned about. He was skiing in Vail at the time, so we closed it that day, and then it gave us focus for the next couple months to purge 30-something years of, you know, books and all kinds of ephemera that we've collected. I mean, you know, it was an interesting focus. Pat and I would go in daily at our own routine. Maggie didn't go into the gallery for 2 months. She worked from home. Lauren worked from home. And so we just kind of, you know, had our sights set on moving the gallery. We had to do some remodeling, and we softly opened in July of 2020 down here. You couldn't have a show. You couldn't really do much. So we just softly opened. And where we were, you may not have seen where we were in Vail Village, but we were kind of hidden in this plaza, in the back of this plaza. So if you were really looking at art, people found you, but the casual gawker would never find us. So like you would do and I would do if we go to Santa Fe or Jackson Hole or Tucson or wherever, you find where the good galleries are and you go and see them. But if you're not particularly interested in art, you're not going to just stumble in very often. And so it's been a wonderful transition. We really haven't regretted it. We own a 1,200 square foot, what we call the art vault in Vail Village, that has an art research library, about 4,500 books, and and art, paintings and sculpture. It's an awesome little underground hidden treasure. So
That's
we
part
meet.
of you own that? The art
We own
vault?
that.
Oh,
Yeah. So
yeah, so that's cool. What is that? What exactly is that? So you have
well,
a building in Vail that's
yeah,
filled
right in the
with,
Village and Plaza,
yeah,
and
with-
it's underground storage, big facility. Basically, it's one of the underground businesses, and so we've always had it as an art vault. And then moving down Valley, we added the bookcases years ago, and just to kind of have a collective art library. So when I started purging books and ephemera from the last 30 years, a year and a half ago, I started realizing inevitably that I had 2 and 3 copies and 4 copies of some books. I mean, if I found a great art book, I'd buy 10 copies and give them to artists. And but inevitably, I'd end up with 1 at home and 1 in my office and whatever. So I tried to get down to 1, one of each book. So we've been selling off the books, and I have some great art books. I grew up in the art world, so I have that disease. I grew up creating, painting, and drawing, but not at a serious level, more of just a hobby level. And my dad, of course, is a Western artist, so I grew up around that. But so I have that passion. I mean, to me, it's a life of educating, and you're always trying to see how these artists fit in today, no matter if they're traditional, contemporary. Are they good? Are they great? Do they matter? And just more for my own research, whether I represent them or not, doesn't matter. I kind of like you do, you're interested. And so you just continually are learning and absorbing and trying to form your opinions about, where we're going and what matters, what we've been involved with. And, for years I was really, really involved with the Cowboy Artists of America, and still am, but I don't get to enjoy it like I used to when I was dealing with Joe Beeler and all the guys.
in fact, we'll get to that, but I'm going to go back to the beginning because this seems like the natural outlet. You threw like 5 bombs right out there. Yeah, my dad was an artist. Yeah, I grew up with art. I loved art. All these things, but most people probably don't know about you, and a lot of them I might not know as well. So let's go back to the beginning. Where did you grow up?
I was born in Palo Alto, California, and in the Bay Area. So grew up in a family that both sides, my mom's side of the family, my father's side of the family, were large families from that California Bay Area and Northern California. My dad's side had ranches in Modoc County up in Northern California. So both sides of the family knew each other pretty well. And I grew up, really felt like I was raised by a huge, loving family of grandparents, great grandparents. My grandmother's always had the time. It was just awesome. And then, and my dad, so he grew up out there, and he pursued a life of fine art. He ended up getting into animation and then computer animation. He was kind of right on the cutting edge of computer animation, and also art directing. He became an art director. His offices were in San Francisco, but he would commute to Hollywood fairly often, and eventually actually became the art director for the Emmy Awards. And that was mid 70s. And we picked up roots from California and moved to Durango, Colorado, to a ranch there, so Dad could pursue a fine art career. So, I'm a kid, so to me it was exciting going from California, somewhat of a beach kid and California kid, to the ranch in the mountains and skiing and all of that. And so we moved to a very large ranch south of town in Durango. It was called the Hodder Ranch. We didn't own the ranch, but it was a big cow calf, 1,000 head of Herefords and 300 head of quarter horse mares and brood mares, and a big stud operation. Just an amazing place. And my parents were there on the ranch almost 30 years. and they had two big ranches south of town, one up north by Purgatory ski area. And
They were running cattle.
so it was a big outfit. Two brothers really owned it, and then they split within a few years of us being there. And so it was half of what it was. They sold off half of the stock, and the ranch acreage was still the same. One brother kept it all. So growing up, obviously I would work on the ranch. I started ski racing and Nordic jumping and being
How old
involved.
were you when you guys moved from Palo Alto there?
I was 11.
So you were 11.
Yeah.
So you were in middle school, junior high.
I was just starting 6th grade.
Oh yeah. So maybe middle school, depending on where you were.
Yeah, actually back then, 7th, 8th, 9th was middle school in Colorado, and 10th, 11th, 12th was high school. But it was just, for me, it was idyllic. I have two older sisters and two younger brothers. My older sisters, I don't think it was quite as idyllic for them.
Sure not.
Being uprooted from their teen years from the California environment to a cow town, and Durango really was, even though they had the train and whatnot, it was somewhat of a cow town. But
why do you think your dad did that? I mean, that's a hell of a move. I mean, he's really, you're running the Emmys, you're really at the top of your game, right? And he's probably in his early 40s, maybe.
He was let's see, he was 36, 37 maybe.
Yeah.
And my mom was up for it. I think pursuing a fine art career was kind of a dream they'd had. And so he took a leap of faith. Yeah, he was making great money in California. Both of them were. She was working in computers and whatnot. And so,
wow.
And my mom and dad actually divorced when I was young. So this was my stepmother, who I'd known since I was very young. And but both sides of the family remained close, from my original mother and to this day, actually. But they took a leap of faith and starved for 5 years. I was too young to really know we were starving. I mean, he cowboyed half the time on the ranch and trade for pork and beef. My mom was awesome at gardening and holding it all together and creative in every way. And
did he grow up on a ranch? Did he learn those skill sets growing up on a ranch?
He always had horses. His summers were spent on the family ranches in Northern California, and there were some pretty serious ranches. And his first pony was a range pony that was brought in off the range, a wild colt, and so he was part of training that, and he did a lot of endurance rides over from Stanford over to the coast. He grew up around the Stanford area. And my dad's dad was actually a doctor, and he was President Hoover's doctor after the war, and all the humanitarian efforts and stuff. So he kind of grew up in that world.
Was your dad's dad a cardiologist?
He was a hematologist.
He was a hematologist. Did Hoover he must have had some kind of cancer, hematological problem. He
was interesting. He went to Creighton, my grandfather did. And then my dad actually was sent off to boarding school in high school. He went to Shattuck Military Academy. So he kind of had this, to me, it's romantic, because he rode the train from California, and through Southern California, all the way back up to Minnesota. I don't know how the rail lines worked, but it always seems pretty neat to hear about it now. But yeah, he grew up in a really interesting life. So he was always comfortable with horses and cattle, and he's a great cowboy himself, and just knows horses inside out, upside down. So moving to this big ranch was idyllic for him.
Yeah.
Where he really could. He ended up cowboying half the time, and but he had interesting things. When I was 13, a good client of his from Texas owned a block in Silverton, Colorado. And he had all these little shops and a restaurant and apartments upstairs. And he told my dad, well, if you manage that for the summer, you can have a studio gallery up there, and I'll pay you to oversee. And there's other shopkeepers and whatnot. And we got a couple shops you can run. So my sister and I moved with my dad. I still can't believe my mom put up with this, but we moved for the summer to Silverton, and I had my own store, a rock shop that I ran. My sister had a candy store. We only had to be open from 11 to 4 each day when the train came in. And we'd go to dinner at the pool hall with Dad, and had to go back home once we lost playing pool. But we rock hounded around, and it was a fun couple summers that we did that. My mom would come up fairly regularly. My grandmother came out, and my brothers are a lot younger, so they needed attention too. But it was an interesting way. And then as I got older, I started spending my summers living with the older couple that owned the ranches at the Upper Ranch near Purgatory. And so I would live with them for 2.5, 3 months. And I got $300 a month, 3 days off a month, and chased cows and built fence and, dug post holes.
How old were you then? 16,
That
17?
was like 14, 15, 16,
Yeah.
those summers. But during the year you worked on the ranch, they really, it was a neat way to learn ranching, because
I bet you didn't feel that way when you were digging a fence post.
yeah, I fought it. I think I fought it, but we were peeling our own cedar posts and using the bark to line the ditches for erosion, and all kinds of stuff that I look back on it and it's just gone. Everything's gone to metal posts and machinery to do all the work, but they did it by the book back then, and it was really it built a work ethic in me.
I bet it did.
I worked for a bookstore in Durango that a friend of Dad's owned. I had a paper route. I just did whatever. I mean, the money, there was no gravy train. So it's like, if you wanted something, you better work for it.
Yeah. And so were you interested in art at that point? Were you making art, or,
yeah, well,
your
the
dad
studio
is, right?
Yeah. And the gallery downtown, and there was a few art stores, and as far as art supply stores. And so it was always interesting to me. I was fascinated by my own subjects. I mean, ski racing and scuba diving and things that I, had grown up and dreamed about. So I was creating art. I wasn't, the plein air movement wasn't quite a thing. Dad would go out and paint some with artist friends in Durango, Mike DeSantnik, who you might know of, and a guy, Paul Falwell, and a number of other artists that kind of circulated through that area. Dave McGarry actually lived in Durango for a period of time, and I didn't know him then, but Dad knew him. And then, of course, I had a long relationship with McGarry. But yeah, so art was always something that I would work on, drawings and whatnot, for hours and hours. But you know how it is, you have to kind of get away from it to come back and have perspective. And my dad would come up and look at a drawing and, offer a few critiques and changes, and it would be amazing. His whole life is about drawing. So, it was a neat way to grow up. I mean, art books, and I was fascinated by, a lot of the Western artists, and of course, artists that Dad had paid attention to, and the cowboy artists, which I wasn't really privy that much to who and what the cowboy artists of America were until later on. But, I did look at the art books of Frank McCarthy and a lot of the guys that were creating at the time. So
what was your dad making? Was it Western?
Yeah. So he, and still does, Dad's 82. He still goes in the studio every day. He's a Western artist. And
what's his first name?
Jim Reynolds. Yeah. Okay. But back then, the subjects, as we all remember, in the 70s, mountain man subjects were a big deal.
Yeah.
And it wasn't quite the Native American things. It was a lot of allegorical cowboy paintings, cattle paintings, and the mountain man theme was huge. We had Centennial, so many different movies that featured mountain men. And I think a lot of the artists, especially the illustrators that ended up coming out west, had that romanticized vision and were scholars on reading about the fur trade era and expansion west. So there was a lot more interest from the public. Today, when you look at even collectors, very few people really know that much about the fur trade anymore. I mean, obviously you have heritage in it, and but to me, it's always been something that's fascinating. My dad, I think in his heart, he was kind of a mountain man. And so we'd go hunting around the woods and the mountains, and he'd do sketches and ideas for paintings and photograph. And it was fun to just kind of get out there and pretend to be an explorer and haunt around that country. So, but as his work solidified, he started showing in different galleries. He showed at Breckenridge Gallery in the later 70s. He was showing in Durango, always at Gallery Marguerite. Then he started showing with Shriver's, which was a great gallery in Taos at the time. Yep. And then eventually he showed with Rudy Wunderlich in Chicago, and then started showing with the Cogswells, which had a gallery called Park Gallery in Vail. And they also owned the Squash Blossom, which was kind of like a trading post. And yep. Then they had the Squash Blossom in Aspen,
yep.
and originally the Squash Blossom in Colorado Springs, and then they opened one in Denver. So as life kind of went on, and I was skiing and involved in the high school world, my parents were coming up to Vail for a show. This was my senior year of high school for President's Weekend, and they asked me if I wanted to come up and ski while they had their opening and were spending time with the Cogswells. And my sister was going to stay home with my brothers at the ranch, and I thought, God, this would be great. I'd never skied Vail, so I came up and had an amazing 4 days. And the Cogswell said, gosh, you ought to come work for us this summer, before you go to college. And I thought about it, and so I went home, wrote them several drafts of a letter. They found me a place to live. I graduated from high school in early June, and my dad drove me up with all my stuff. July 5th, I started work. And
was this in Vail?
This is in Vail. So they had two galleries in the Lodge Promenade, Squash Blossom and Park Gallery, and they're about 60 yards apart on this promenade right in the heart of Vail Village. So here I am, this kid, I don't know anybody in town. They had all these great people that worked for them. And they were representing at the Squash Blossom was awesome because in those days, they were representing some of the finest indigenous creators.
Yeah, they were.
They had Charles Lolema, they had Ben Nighthorse, the Rosettas, they had Rondina Huma, they had just everyone. So it was, for a kid who knew nothing about it, it was really exciting to, like we had Lolema came up for a show. I knew he was a big deal, but I didn't truly understand it until years later.
What year was this that you were working for them?
Huh?
What year did you graduate from high school?
So that was 83.
So you were working, you started in 83 with them.
Yeah. And then, Ray
that was the height too. That was really.
We represented Earl Biss.
Yeah. Wow.
Before American Design got him. And it was an interesting time to witness a lot of that. And of course, John and Patty were in their 30s at that time. I'm 18. Yeah. And so they've got 4 stores going, and Mark Alexander was their partner with Peyote Bird in the Larimer Square store. So that was a whole nother dynamic, but it was an interesting thing. I was the jack of all trades, from polishing jewelry to shipping stuff. They always said, oh, you're too young to sell art. But every time I was in the gallery, I knew the art business instinctually from seeing, the good, the bad, and the ugly shows that nothing sold, shows that sold out. My mom in tears trying to get paid from an art dealer for 6 months, for a sale that was a big deal to them, but not to the dealer. I mean, just things I didn't know I was absorbing at the time. And they made a big difference later on because I had a lot of empathy for the artists and how hard it is. And it really is a partnership. If they're married, whether it's whoever's the creator, whether it's husband or the wife, it takes two, and it takes a village to get it done. And it's not easy. The perception is that these things flow, but
yeah,
it's a battle.
And so how long did you work for them?
So I worked for them for about 3.5 years.
Oh,
I ended up, so that here we come through the summer, we're heading into the fall, and I've made up my mind that I don't want to go to school in the fall. So I politicked and talked to my mom and dad about staying in Vail. I certainly wanted to ski, and I could keep working for Cogswell. So my dad said, well, okay, but you can't just hang out. You got to take some college classes. So we have Colorado Mountain College, which is a college community campus through Steamboat and Glenwood and Leadville and Vail. And it's an awesome, for people living in the mountains, it's a great opportunity. So I started taking some classes, but I worked like 2 to 10 in the Lodge Promenade. And so I skied every day, would take some classes a week, but I was the guy on the road. If they needed stuff hauled to Aspen, I'd go to Aspen, or if they were repainting the store in Denver, I'd go to Denver, started going to New Mexico. And it was just, I didn't know anyone, so I was up for working constantly. And they had little children, so I grew up with younger brothers, so I knew how to take care of kids. And they lived right behind me in the Telemark condos that I was renting a room in. And so I would babysit the kids and clock my time clock and eat all the food in their house. And, I just had a great time. I worked like crazy. And so
they ended up coming down to Green Valley. Did you know that? They retired. Yeah.
Mm-mm.
Yeah. I ended up with a lot of that.
You're thinking of the people they bought out.
Oh, maybe that was it.
Yeah. So the original Squash Blossom was Colorado Springs, and then another guy started the Vail Squash Blossom. And so they had a copyright or, somewhat dispute. So he bought him out in Vail. So the Cogswells were originally from Colorado Springs, and they came to Vail long before me, and took over the Squash Blossom, started Park Gallery, and then which eventually became Cogswell Gallery maybe 3.5 years later. So by like 86, they moved it to and called it the Cogswell Gallery.
Got it. And then the other people bought out the Squash Blossom.
And the other people they bought out of the Squash Blossom, and they moved to Arizona.
Yeah.
And so the Cogswell stayed and are still here in the Valley. And
okay, good.
And they eventually sold.
I didn't think that was their name, but I knew they owned the Squash Blossom.
Yeah. And the Cogswells have a long family history in Colorado Springs, so they have some deep roots down there. And but they developed an iconic business, and then that changed a lot too. They ended up closing Aspen. They closed Larimer Square, and a lot of that was not only changing taste, but really the rents and the challenges of trying to keep 4 stores or 5 stores running well at the same time.
Yeah, and they were all and they're dealing in Western and Native American material as well. And
with the Native American artists they were working with, most of that is it's a cash business.
Yeah,
you're buying work outright, and but it was kind of a neat, fun, romantic time for me to work. And I flew with John and a buddy down to Santa Fe. We stayed the night, saw a lot of people down there. Then we flew to the Hopi Mesas, buzzed First Mesa with his airplane, so they would come down to Powaka and pick us up. And then we went up and spent the night up there, or spent the night down below, but we went up and they invited us to several different ceremonies that were going on. We went over the next day, we went out to Lolama's house, which was the adobe had like purple trim on it. I'll never forget that.
And it's Rolls Royce outside.
Yeah, at Second Mesa. So and then it was kind of cool. We went into Rondina Huma's on Walpi there, First Mesa, and watching John negotiate with her. She had 3 pots, and she's always resonated with me. I love her work, but I'm just a kid, so he's negotiating with her on these 3 pots, and one of them he offers her a lot less. And I thought, oh my God, I can't believe he's doing this to her. And she gave him a look and fought him on it, and he said, well, it's cracked. He knew from the resonance of the pot that it had a hairline crack in it, and so she agreed. Yeah, but
she honestly may not have even noticed.
Until he
probably a firing crack, and she probably didn't even notice it.
Yeah, because she's certainly a great one. But we dealt with Russell Sanchez, Mark Suazo, all these guys. It was an interesting time. We had a really neat gal that. And then Nico Strangeowl opened up in Vail at that time. she worked for John, I think just a little bit, and then opened her own shop. And but so I did that for 3.5 years, and he was going through some managers and things. I actually ended up having open heart surgery in that time.
Hmm.
I was born with a congenital heart defect, aortic stenosis, so was followed from birth at Stanford and ended up having a valve replaced in that time period. And when I, came back to Vail and things just had changed with the way their operation was. And I thought, well, it's time to do something else. So I started working for Vickers Gallery, which was a franchise of Gallery One, which was American Design out of Denver, but they owned the franchise in Vail and Aspen. They lived in Aspen. So I thought, okay, I can learn the hard sell. It was like Gorman prints and Neiman's and, Larry Foder and Erte, different things. So I worked with a gal at Vail, and they had Earl Biss. By that time, they had Biss under contract. So they had Biss and Kevin Red Star they were working with. And so I thought it was a tiny little gallery on the same promenade, in the Lodge Promenade there. So I worked there, and then the director left at the end of the winter. So I took over, and I did that for almost 3.5 years. And I had started, I was married. We were expecting a first child. My oldest daughter, Erica's 32 now. And I had the itch to do something on my own. The Vickers had Aspen and Vail and Breckenridge, and it just, it just wasn't my thing. But by that time, I actually had brought in my dad. He started showing there, and I was looking for a, Western sculptor. Started talking to Dad, and he said, well, this guy, Dave McGarry. So this is like 1987. So this guy, Dave McGarry, he used to live here, and I think he's in Ruidoso, New Mexico now, but he does some interesting work. And so I called Dave, and, we started carrying Dave, and then that led to Gordon Snido, which led to, so a number of those guys, Gary Niblett and whatnot. And then when I went on my own, Janet and I ended up partnering with Ray and Sally Duncan, and we were 50-50 partners, and there's a whole story in that, but it brought a real interesting dynamic to the table, because Ray, of course, was a very serious entrepreneurial person. He started Purgatory Ski Area. He was an oil man, ranching. He also started Crow Canyon Archaeological Center with Dr. Stuart Strever. He just had a lot of different passions and interests, and they had a little gallery in Denver called Claggett Gallery, and they were looking at moving to the high country, and we knew each other and had some interesting interactions. And my dad became a friend of theirs from them buying some art from the gallery in Vail at Park Gallery, where Dad was showing, and I was there. And they found out he was in Durango, and over the years developed a friendship. Anyways, we ran into each other, and they were thinking of opening something in Vail, and it started off a really wonderful 26 years of being 50-50 partners. And Ray and Sally had been married at one point to an artist in Durango, and also had a great background in managing people, and loved art. And Ray had, as an art collector and a lover of all things in the Southwest, he also had a passion as a collector. And then I had passion as, wanting to be an art dealer and really beat the drum for artists. So we formed a partnership in 1989, in the spring of 89, and opened July 3rd, and, kind of never looked back.
You're like 24, right? I mean, you're about 24 years old then.
Yeah. I was 24. Ray was 58. He said, I can't believe I'm going into partnership with a 24-year-old.
I bet. And this is a guy who has done a lot of different things. He's a captain of industry. And so he clearly had a lot of faith in you to be able to do that.
Well, he took a leap of faith right away. They had talked to me about managing it, and I said, I'd love to be a 50-50 partner if we can be right off the bat. And, you know, he became a huge, and they did, both Ray and Sally, became huge mentoring forces in my life. I mean,
bet.
not only in business, but in all things. So for the next almost, 30 years, kind of, we were part of that extended family, the Duncan family. So we were scuba diving all over the world together, and out at the, they own Silver Oak Winery. Ray started that with a partner. And so we were out there all the time, and then the ranch, and that led into, we started representing a bunch of the CAs, and we co-hosted at the ranch, 6, I think, CA trail rides up there at the Diamond Tail. And then, of course, I went on a lot of other ones. And I think at one point in time, we represented maybe 19 of the Cowboy Artists of America that were active at that time.
Yeah, I mean, you really were the CA. You may still be, I don't know, the CA guy, as far as all the people that you represented and your support for that organization. I mean, it was huge. I mean, you were, you were synonymous with it, really, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I think being with Joe Beeler and, Joe and Sharon really broke down a lot of barriers for me. I mean, the first CA show for me was 1989. And I went and stayed with Joe. I went down by myself, and then I went and stayed with Joe and Sharon for 5 days after the show. And Joe, they said, well, is there anybody you'd like to meet? And I said, God, I'd love to meet Jim Reynolds, because he lived in Oak Creek at that time. And Sharon said, oh, I don't know, Joe, what do you think? And he said, well, Jim could offend you. I mean, you never know what he's going to say. He could. Yeah. I said, well, that's okay. I just want to meet him. So Joe arranged a lunch. And at that point, a lot of people don't remember, but Jim had quit the CA. He'd quit about a year and a half before, maybe 2 years before, over a, dispute. And so we arranged a lunch at this Mexican restaurant in Sedona, and we were supposed to meet Jim at noon. So we get there at like 5 till, and Jim's sitting in a booth eating already. And he looks at me, and he's, I'm 24, or maybe I was 25 by that time, I guess. And he looks at me and he's like, hey kid, I don't need another gallery. And I said, well, no, that's okay. I said, I just really wanted to meet you, Jim. And I really think that your heart's in your landscapes. And I just really wanted to shake hands with you. And he's like, okay. And so we sat and had lunch, and Joe and I are on one side of the booth, and Jim is on the other. And Jim is asking Joe, what happened at the CA show? And so Jim is, really wanting to know how the sales were, who won the awards. And so Joe said, oh, Roy Anderson, he sold out a show, and he had some really good work. And Joe's kicking me under the table. And Jim's like, yeah. And he's like, oh, and then Jim Norton, he really had a good show, and he sold out. And he's kicking me under the table. And Reynolds is like, guy's been copying me for years. And it just keeps going. And Joe is just doing everything he can to get Jim fired up. Jim's spitting food. He's all ticked off. And finally, Jim says, I think I want to get back in the CA. And Joe always wore a vest, so he like puts his thumbs in the vest armpit holes, and he leans back and he's kicking me under the table. And of course, we're sitting on the same side.
Right.
And he said, well, Jim, I think if you get me some 8x10 glossies of your work, so I can submit it to the board, and we can take a look at your work and see what kind of work you do. And if it holds up, we can maybe we could have you bring some work to this. And Jim is just fuming, and of course he got right back in. Joe got him right back in that here. But and then, so when we left lunch, Jim was gracious enough. He told me to come out to the house the next day. And so we're standing by the car. Jim drives off in his Corvette. He had a red Corvette. And Joe said, Jim Norton really admires Frank Tenney Johnson, and Jim Reynolds really admires Frank Tenney Johnson. He said, no, Jim Reynolds thinks he is Frank Tenney Johnson. But Jim,
he's not far off, I will say.
He was great. And I
Not
spent
far
a
off.
lot of,
Maybe better actually in some respects.
I spent a lot of time over the years with Jim, and he, you know, I didn't carry his work for a couple of years. I never brought it up to him again. I'd see him, but I didn't bring it up. And he eventually called me and said, "Hey, I remember what you said about my landscapes. Can I send you some?" I said, "Sure, you know, absolutely." So he started sending us landscapes, and we started selling them, and it gave him the freedom to, you know, as he aged, and he was a tall guy, as you remember, and so getting horseback and getting out on ranches, running around trying to shoot photos wasn't as comfortable and easy as it had been when he was younger. And so he, but the landscapes, you know, he could bring what was always in the background to the forefront and focus on that. And as Don Hedgepeth, you know, the great writer, our buddy, who did a lot of books with us, said about Reynolds, he really believed that Reynolds was the first one to bring kind of a high level of art to the CA.
Mm.
You know, because before that it was more story, allegorical works, and they might have been somewhat painterly. Obviously, they had guys like Lougheed in there and Lovell and whatnot. But Reynolds, all of a sudden, it becomes about more than just the subject. You know, I mean, he really starts playing with color and bouncing things off, and he's excited about a whole different side of the art world than just the subject. So
I'd say Fred Fellows is up in there too.
yeah, Fred, oh, of course, Fred was
His landscapes are unbelievable.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I mean, but this is kind of talking about Jim joining the CA way back, you know.
Yeah.
So he kind of elevates the game. Of course, all those guys, you know, had amazing abilities. I mean, I saw Joe do some plein air pieces that were incredible.
Yeah, I bet.
Joe was always a little more in the caricaturish vein, especially when he was younger, like Russell was. But Joe evolves into a high artist too. He becomes much more about color and paint and the movement of paint in his later life, and honoring his subjects with a high level of art, and also sculpting in every medium. Joe worked in every medium. But that, you know, so Reynolds, we start working together. We do a lot of shows over the years, and I stayed with him a lot. And at that time, you know, his partner was Sheila Cottrell, and so she was, and he had built a house by that time in Scottsdale. So and Sheila had her place in Tucson, so she was back and forth all the time. But Jim, you know, he couldn't hear worth a darn. I mean, he was in the Navy. He was in the Battle of Peleliu. He was injured offloading equipment, so he wasn't actually in the Battle of Peleliu, but he was there. And so he was always a little gruff. You know, he'd answer the phone. He'd be out of breath. He always had a little bit of emphysema and lung issues, but he had interesting passions. He was an aviation nut. He grew up in Glendale, California. He saw all the famous pilots. I mean, before LAX, Glendale was it. You know, that was the big aviation hub in California. So he got to see his heroes, and that remained with him his whole life. He was a model maker. He had an incredible shop for making models from blueprints, not from kits. He would mill the parts to make engines that would fly. He was consumed by the 1929 F-4B1 Navy bombers. And he was building one that had about a 6-foot wingspan that would really fly. And you know, he sent it off to the Navy, the museum that the Navy has. I can't remember where it is, in Annapolis maybe. And they were black and white photos of this fuselage, and they couldn't believe it wasn't the full size plane. It was just amazing. So then he really pursued that passion. He built ship models, you know, of tramp steamer. He came back from World War II on. He did a big model of that. So he had all these kind of interesting sides to him that charged the batteries to get in the studio. And so I got to spend time hanging out with him and seeing those passions continually happen. And it was really fun to be part of. You know, he was gruff about other artists' work, especially younger guys. And as you know, friends of his, Matt Smith and Bill Anton, and some of those guys that he became close with, will attest to, he started to soften later on and realized that there was a lot of great art being created. It wasn't, you know, they were giving him a run for it. And So he accepted that. But when he'd answer the phone, whenever I'd call him, he was always out of breath. And I had to do something to break the ice with Jim because he could be kind of grumpy. So I I used to call him, and I'd say, "This is the art dealer from hell," and it would just change the whole tone. He'd laugh, and he'd say, "What's up, kid?" And we'd spend time on the phone. Or sometimes he'd answer the phone, he'd be out of breath, and I'd say, "Oh God, hey, do you have a girl there?" And I'd hang up, and then I'd call him back, and he'd be like, "Oh no, Sheila's in Tucson." I just tease him any way I could, and he fell in love with the gallery crew. He fell in love with the girls that worked here. They're all like his granddaughters. He had a really soft side to him, and he had a real high ethics as far as, he had a lot of regrets too. Did a lot of things in his life that he wasn't proud of, really regretted them at the end. But all in all, he was happy to be part of the art world. And, he quit the CA for a second time towards the end of his life there.
That one I knew.
And then we did that great book with him, Landscapes of James Reynolds. When he had cancer, he got cancer of the vocal cords, and he was trying to get his pilot's license again, and he bought a Stearman. He bought one of 7 full-size 1929 F-4B-1 Navy bombers that was being built. That was kind of interesting. And so we were part of this process of him trying to relive his dreams and become a pilot again and start flying. And, so he just, the book, The Landscapes of James Reynolds, with his cancer and trying to get his pilot's license, it was a nice distraction that he could keep his focus through the cancer treatments and things. And so he wrote it all longhand, and Sheila helped edit just a little bit of it. But she tried to let his words stay. So he wrote it as it is. I mean, I don't know if you've seen it, but we printed it at O'Neill, where we did a few other books in Phoenix, the old company that's so awesome there. And we printed just 750 of them. And then Jim was worried about it, that artists couldn't afford it. So the books cost about $75 a piece to print, and we sold them for $85 a piece. And then we gave about 150 of the 750 away. He gave it to all his artist buddies, and we did the same. And it was a great, fun project. And he could be close and go see the color presses and all that stuff. And it gave him a lot of excitement. He did write a rant on his feelings about modern art in the back, and he really wanted, right before it went to press, he wanted to take it out. And I said, "No, Jim, you that's how you feel, and it matters. This book is for artists and those that would care. So that's how you feel, and I think you should leave it in there." So he did, and it was kind of cool that he did, because it really paints a picture of Jim.
Is that book still available anywhere?
It's sold out, and I mean, I've seen it for $600 now. It's crazy. Actually, it's right here. It's this is the book.
Yeah,
James Reynolds. It's what's interesting about it, there are no titles for all the paintings, and there are no titles and no sizes. He wants the artist to look at them for what they are. And so it's kind of interesting. There's a bunch of grayscale in there. It's just it was a great project to work with him on. And it gave him a lot of joy. So we did a show and book signing, which actually he couldn't attend the book signing. We did him from afar. That was in December of 2009. And then he, of course, passed away in February 2010.
You don't see many of his paintings come up for sale. Is that because he didn't make a ton? In other words, he was a very methodical artist, or do you think it is that just people don't want to get rid of his work?
I think it's the latter. I mean, people just don't get rid of it. Eddie Bassett probably owns 75 Reynolds paintings or something. So he's got a bunch of them. Ray Duncan had a bunch of them. But all in all, we sold a ton of work for him, but he was doing about 25 to 30 paintings maximum a year. And the way Jim would work on things is he had an art vault, and he would start these canvases, and he would cycle them through in a love-hate relationship. So he'd pull out a Western, he'd work on it until he got frustrated too much, and he'd put it away, and he'd pull out something else. And then as he worked through that, he would look at, if we were going to have a show, for example, he might have 25 pieces to choose from, and he'd pick 18 or 20 or 16, and they were all pretty major, 40 40s, 36 36. He was painting bigger with his landscapes, and he would pull what he thought were the best pieces, and have a show once a year. And then CA show, he would paint, obviously more Westerns for that.
Mhm.
And so he just was I really can see when Jim fired on all cylinders, when a painting was really finished, there are just subtleties and bits of color that are so abstract up close, and yet when you get back, they just work and harmonize the painting.
Well, part of that ability, and I'd like to talk to you about it, is that you paint as well, because you got into that as well, and you're a very competent artist into your own right. Tell us a little bit about that, because I think that does give you an advantage as an art dealer, honestly, to understand when you're laying paint down and what's required, as well as just the understanding of the effort and time that goes into making these things.
Yeah, I truly love creative people, and when somebody is willing to commit thousands and thousands of hours to something to be amazing at it, it just blows my mind. I skied so much in my life. I never think about how to ski. I can ski anything and rip it up. And they go out and paint with John and Terry Moyers, and they're that way. They don't even think about how to do it. They're just game on. Let's go. And
John thinks about trying to get 2 paintings done by the time Terry does one.
Yeah. And we've had the good fortune, Maggie and I, to go, and my wife Maggie is very creative also, but we've had the good fortune of going to Canada several times with the Moyers, and we've gone to Hawaii with them and stuff. And so we're typically painting too. So we go, stay up at they had a place in Canmore, and then we'd go up to Lake O'Hara Lodge in the fall, and we'd paint for 4 days, 5 days, and paint in Canmore and Banff and all around these areas that they had haunted most of their life. And with Bob Lougheed, and then the two of them, and all kinds of other artists that ebb and flowed through their world. And, so I only have hundreds of hours. When I look at my time painting, I have the heart of an artist and the desire to study it all the time and to put things into perspective. But, I have to really think about it. I have to really think about it in the field. And John and Terry were always so encouraging. With Maggie and I both, they were like, just don't give up, just keep going. And when you get it away from the setting, it won't look so bad. But I had a funny story, because one day we hiked, we ended up running into Ralph Oberg and Shirley. They were up at Lake O'Hara Lodge. So we kind of palled around. Shirley wasn't much for hiking in the snow. And one day it snowed about 4 inches at the lodge and about a foot up at Lake MacArthur. We broke trail all the way up there with our painting gear, John and Terry, Maggie and I, and Ralph. And we had some awesome photos. But here it is, this gray day, sun's coming through every once in a while. There's larches, which are the pine trees that turn yellow in the fall, but not very many of them. So we get up to Lake MacArthur, and it's these big mountains with all the snow and this dark gunmetal blue lake. And so, how do you paint that? And so I set up next to John. Ralph's off painting by himself. Maggie and Terry are about 100 yards from us. And so I'm painting away. Of course, John's painting away, and he comes over to me. And he looks, because he'd critique my work every once in a while. He comes over and he said, "Wow." He said, "Your values are really good. I've never seen that color, but those values are really good." And, I had this like bizarre kind of purpley color
Right.
I developed that I thought I saw. And then, snow squall would blow through. And then, but those guys were just amazing. Obviously guys like Wayne Wolf that, to watch and be with artists, Gonski, we would do these paint outs. And so I was always the artist, non-artist. I would I would go. I had really a lot of luck in going with Steve Elliott and a bunch of artists to Crescent H Ranch in Jackson Hole out in out in Wilson, Wyoming, for the miniature show. We'd go stay up there for almost a week, and it was Steve Elliott and myself. We went up together. Mitch Billis, Bill Reese was there. Kwong Ho was there. Mimi Litschauer was there. Wayne was there. Skip Whitcomb was there, but not staying with us. And Kim English. It was a really interesting bunch of artists, and they were all, I mean, Eldridge Hardy, everybody was up there for the miniature show. And that was when the miniature show at that time was in the bank still, just little pieces. And then they would have the artist party out in Wilson at Nora's, or I can't remember the restaurant. And Bill Kerr, who was so amazing. So I'm the non-artist, but because I'm out painting with these artists, I got drug on along with all this stuff. It was really fun. And we'd go out and paint, game on, hunt down all kinds of wildlife. And we did that a couple of years. My dad came up one year, Noe Perez from Texas, a great painter, came, and it just was really fun. And we did some paint outs at the Diamond Tail and here in the county. I mean, I painted with Gonski one time, and Fritzler, and a bunch of artists. We were up at Kent Lemon. We were up at the Diamond Tail, and Joyce Lee, another great. She was always one of the boys. Joyce was a great painter from Billings, and she died not long after Jim. But we'd have 5 guys in Joyce. I don't know why it always ended up that way, but everybody got along so well, and she was a really good painter on the spot. But we're up at the Diamond Tail, and Walt's painting these really neat old cabins, and it's in the fall, and there's been some snow, and the cabins are kind of falling down, and Gonski's just a master of game on from life. And I said, "Hey Walt, can I watch you paint?" And he's like, "No." He said, "You can sit up next to me and we'll paint together, and you'll see me painting, but I don't want you to just stand there and watch me paint." It was a great lesson, So I did. And to see guys like Fritzler even painting watercolor on a vertical easel from life, I watched him one time sit in the middle of a bison herd up at the Duncan's Ranch. They had about 2,000 head of bison, and he just sat there, no drawing, just with a brush, and did about 40 studies of bison in every different position on one panel. Hey, by the way,
yeah, he's showing me. I've been seeing this bracelet. He's stopping to show me this great bracelet. It used to be Medicine Man Gallery material. That's a great one. For those again who are not watching this, you should go. It's what is it, about a 1910 Navajo ingot, great square braid. Yeah, that's a good one. Fits my wrist.
A friend of mine found that for me.
Oh, do they?
Yeah. That was you. Yeah. That was I'll never forget. That was High Noon Auction 2005 with Beeler. We were doing signing, and I said to you, "Mark, I've always been looking for a great bracelet," and you said, "I got one."
Yeah, that is a great one.
I wear it 90% of the time.
When you get a good bracelet, that's all you want to wear. It really is.
I've worn it all over the world. It's just.
I left mine at home because I'm going to work out. I only have a couple rings on, but.
I didn't know if you'd have the Hawaiian attire on today or what.
Well, I always have the Hawaiian Palaoa, but yeah.
I was going to dress up for you.
Yeah, you should. On. Yeah, put some stuff on, some good bling.
Kathy Smith gave me these.
So when you are doing the artwork that you make, do you show in a gallery?